Friends, I was here 2 years ago, and I remember my meeting with so many friends and addressing lectures. In October, I came on a brief visit to the States for 12 days, this last October. But I couldn't come here, New York and San Francisco, San Diego, and then Boston, a 12-day visit. I am here today, tomorrow, day after. Then from here going to Dallas, Saskatoon, Chicago, Ganges in Michigan, Detroit, Boston, Providence, New York. Then I fly to Amsterdam for 3 weeks in Holland. Very tight program. Holland and Germany 2 weeks. And Berlin, both communist East Berlin and West Berlin. This is the program. I completed just now 32 days in Australia. The whole of Australia, covering from Port Darwin, Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Canberra, Newcastle, Armidale, Brisbane, the whole area. That was a wonderful experience. Every year I go Australia and Holland and pass through the States here. This evening, Swami Swahananda has given me this subject, Vedanta for modern man. This is a Vedanta society existing for so many decades. Several other Vedanta societies also are functioning in the United States, England, France, Switzerland, Fiji, and other places. What is that helps us in this Vedanta to meet the challenges of life? Swami Vivekananda brought his Vedanta in an authentic form towards the end of the last century. Vedanta was studied and understood even earlier by the transcendentalists and other leaders of thought. But an authentic presentation of Vedanta in the States came from Swami Vivekananda. From the day he addressed the Parliament of Religions, 1893, till he passed away, 1902, the best part of his life he spent here to project this profound philosophy of Vedanta. And the reception that his presentation got from the people of this country itself proved the relevance of that Vedanta to the modern world. What is the nature of that relevance? There are two aspects to this relevance. One is from the point of view of human knowledge. A lot of knowledge has accumulated during the last 4 centuries. Scientific knowledge, precise, verifiable, communicable. In the light of this knowledge, many existing theologies and philosophies have lost their relevance. And we can see that in the history of the West during the last 4 centuries. There is a vacuum so far as philosophy is concerned. Scientific developments are there, but religion and philosophy, what were earlier known, theology and philosophy, these have become increasingly irrelevant. Whatever is available in the West, not at all relevant with the advance of scientific thought. These two subjects, theology and philosophy, have got a bad name in recent times. Theoretical, speculative, and imaginative, nothing to do with truth or reality, doctrinal. That's why scientific development made for deterioration in these two subjects, philosophy and theology. The usual criticism of philosophy is also applicable to theology, that it doesn't deal with reality. Ultimately, it becomes mere words, mere dogmas, creeds, and religion, and words, and logical systems in philosophy. One of the interesting episodes in this interrelation and the relevance of these two in the modern period comes from a story. A theologian presided over a lecture by a philosopher, and he introduced the philosopher and his subject, philosophy. He said, there is a great philosopher and he is going to speak to you on his own subject, philosophy. I would like to give you some definition of philosophy to put the subject in perspective. And he said, philosophy is searching for a black cat in a dark room that is not there. That's called philosophy. That is the usual definition in the last century when science is developed and these wordy philosophies lost all their relevance. Then I now request the philosopher to address you. Theologian said. Philosopher was embarrassed, but he is intelligent. So he said, before I begin my lecture, I would like to tell you what is the meaning of the subject of the chairman of today's meeting, namely theology. He didn't define it. He defined only my subject. I would like to define his subject. He said, my subject is searching for a black cat in a dark room that is not there. And what is his subject? Searching for a black cat in a dark room that is not there, but claiming he has found it. So, in these two definitions you can see to what disrepute these subjects had come, and the sciences ruling supreme, no place for anything else. It was this atmosphere that prevailed in the United States. Traditional religion, dogmatic religion, institutional religion lost all credence. So also these philosophies, prosaic philosophies, speculative philosophies, good as intellectual exercise and nothing more. But people are seeking truth. Science itself is a search for truth. And then in religion, there is a great search for truth, sincere spiritual search. But this could not get any sanction either from science or from this kind of theology and philosophy. It is in that context Swamiji brought a new message. It is new so far as the West is concerned, but the message itself is very ancient, 4,000 or 5,000 years old. That is Vedanta. And the impact of that Vedanta presentation by Swamiji on the American mind was tremendous. Later on the English mind, because it is a profound philosophy and spirituality in one. Not speculative philosophy, not doctrinal, dogmatic religion, but a philosophy which combines the experiential aspect of religion with a rational aspect of philosophy. That is why Vedanta appealed to thinking minds, questioning minds. There is one system in the whole world which respects the scientific spirit, the inquisitive spirit. Vedanta always emphasizes question. Don't take things for granted. That was a new experience for people in the West. We have been told that you must accept everything on trust, have faith, have belief, don't question. All this we have been told. But here, Vedanta comes and says, question, investigate. What Jesus called, ask and it shall be given. Seek and ye shall find it. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. This asking, seeking, knocking is what makes a subject scientific. So in tune with the scientific spirit and the scientific achievements of the West during the last 4 centuries, Vivekananda brought a philosophy as rational, scientific as any science can be, which can stand questioning. Not only stand questioning, but invites questioning, invites investigation. That is something wonderful. A tremendous impact that presentation had on the Western mind in the last century. It is that Vedanta that is going on, touching minds here and there, making them sit up and think. From the theoretical knowledge point of view, this Vedanta answers to the intellectual doubts and confusions and the seekings of the modern mind. In Swami Vivekananda's time, several conclusions of modern science were already there in Vedanta. One big subject which is agitating the minds of people in this country today, and I found it agitating in Australia also recently, subject of evolution. So much of controversy is going on in this late period of 1984, more than 130 years after it was promulgated by Darwin in the Western world. So we want to have the old biblical theory of creation. We don't want this evolutionary theory. Big controversy is going on here. Now when you think of that and turn to Vedanta, this evolution was a known theory 4,000 years ago in India. As one of the Western writers have said, the Hindus were evolutionists thousands of years before Darwin. That's the language. We don't find any conflict in India from the philosophy or religion side with modern physical science in this subject of evolution. Because Vedanta taught this truth that this universe is a product of an evolution from an undifferentiated state to a differentiated state. Energy undifferentiated before creation. Energy differentiated after creation. And all this statement is supported by precise scientific terminologies and concepts. That is Vedanta. Evolution first cosmic, then organic, but after developing man in the organic evolution, what is the next direction of evolution? There Vedanta has something profound to say to all humanity. And today's biology is also slowly probing this particular subject. What is the go of evolution? Once man comes upon the scene, it looks different from what it was before, because all pre-human species lived according to nature. They were just functions of nature. But in man there is a capacity to alter nature, to control nature, direct nature to some new dimension. He may as well destroy the whole of nature, destroy himself also in the process. But that power is there. This is a profound subject today. Vedanta throws light on this great question: how to make this human being, with so much of power in his hand, a constructive, creative individual, not destructive. That's a crucial question in this modern age. Power has come. Which way I shall use this power? That's the most crucial question. We can destroy ourselves, or we can make everybody happy and fulfilled. That's a function of physical science, partly. It needs another science to fulfill it. That is what India calls the science of spirituality, the science of religion. And today, these two must flow together, physical science and the science of spirituality. Vedanta brought that message to the Western world. This wonderful subject of evolution, expounded ages ago. And the most important part of that subject is human evolution. Man evolving from this present state of body-mind consciousness into a God consciousness. Consciousness of the infinite, expanding his mind and heart. That's a wonderful idea. Ethical values, moral values, aesthetic values, all these things come as a byproduct of human evolution beyond the organic level. Organic evolution has no meaning so far as man is concerned, because nature has given man the finest, the most versatile organ, the cerebral system. We don't need any organs hereafter. And so, today's biology is thinking, what is the direction of evolution at the human stage? Whatever little insight has come in this 20th century biology was already there in our Vedantic thinking. Man must grow beyond this organic limitation, this genetic limitation. That is the capacity nature has given to man. Expand your psyche, infinite dimension. That is the wonderful development of man. We call it the spiritual growth of man. Putting it in the Vedantic language, manifestation of the divinity hidden within us is the whole work that we have to do with the help of this cerebral system. Psychosocial evolution is the word used by 20th century biology. Organic evolution rising to the psychosocial level, that this psyche can be detached from this tiny organic system and it can expand. This consciousness can be raised beyond the organic level into higher and higher levels. That is human evolution. Morality, ethics, the good life, a crime-free society, people fulfilled in their heart and mind, all these achievements are possible. These are all possibilities hidden within man. And there is a science about it. That is the science Vedanta brought to this world, Western world. We need that science. And so, not only subject of evolution, many other aspects of reality as expressed in the human situation, Vedanta expounded ages and ages ago. These are truths and not opinions, not dogmas, not creeds. Why they are called truths? Because anyone can discover them. They are not a private property of anybody. They are universal. 2 plus 2, 4 is universal. Okay? Under any latitude or longitude, you will accept this truth. Scientific truths have that universality. Spiritual truths are still more universal because they deal with things which are truly real, permanent, eternal. The nature of the soul, nature of God. This is how Vedanta expounded this subject. And today we need to understand this subject much more than what any other time. So all these 4,000 years, great sages developed this subject. They peeped into man himself. What are his possibilities? It's a profound subject. The whole of physical science deals with the possibilities hidden in a piece of matter. Material possibilities, physical possibilities. We have come to nuclear science and discovered immense nuclear energy resources in a piece of matter. Vedanta did it from the human point of view. Infinite possibilities hidden in every human being. Even the tiny newborn baby, there are infinite possibilities. And Vedanta is the science and technique to help us to understand this and to unfold these possibilities. What a beautiful science, what a beautiful philosophy. And so, in this modern period, this Vedanta has come at the right time, when the mind had become questioning old belief, old dogmas. And when you started questioning, they crumbled down. They couldn't stand it at all. Till 17th century, all dogmas could stand because nobody questioned them. Nobody was allowed to question them. After that, scientific spirit came. People started questioning. People started even rebelling against God, just like we rebel against the king. The American people rebelled against George III. Very interesting story. We don't want you to rule over us, to tax us. We will manage our own affairs. An external authority, 3,000 miles away, we don't want. Sovereignty rests in us, not in you. Now this is a political development. It has a parallel development in religion. Any external authority of a God, extra-cosmic, he may receive worship from me for some time, but he may also receive protest from me sometimes, and sometimes a little bit of rebellion, and finally dethronement as well. That is what has happened to this extra-cosmic God of monotheism, which has ruled the Western world these thousands of years. Vedanta comes in. What exactly is this concept of God? A God sitting outside the sky, ruling this world? Vedanta has no place for such a God. It sees the divine in man and nature. At the heart of this universe, it sees everything divine. And the whole evolution is this kind of divinity getting involved in matter, involved in that inner things that you see as physical nature, then taking a return journey, rediscovering itself through all these organic developments that have taken place in evolution. And Vedanta said, in man, that infinite consciousness from which universe evolved can rediscover itself. It cannot rediscover itself in the sun, in the earth, in a piece of matter. It cannot rediscover itself even in the animal world. Only in man, this infinite consciousness can rediscover itself. Here you have the meaning of evolution, the wonderful idea that this human being can achieve fulfillment, can expand his consciousness, can feel one with all. All these possibilities are there within this human being. Not only possibility, but possibility of its manifestation, its realization. Nature has given man that organic capacity. Now, this kind of language coming from religion or philosophy will certainly appeal to scientific minds. We don't depend upon external factors. We explain a thing from the thing itself, that within that particular entity there are all these possibilities. So that this human being has physical possibilities, intellectual possibilities, and then spiritual possibilities. All are there. Vedanta presents this subject of human life and human destiny from this point of view. That is why it is so relevant. Theoretically, these subjects are receiving tremendous attention today. Even in the 19th century science, there were so many points of contact between Vedanta and the current science of the time. In Vivekananda's lectures, you will find how physicists in America used to attend his lectures, and they will tell him that we can demonstrate the truth of Vedanta through our own theories today. You will find it in the literature of Vivekananda. That was in the 19th century. But today, revolutionary developments have taken place in physics and in biology. And all these are close to Vedanta. Nuclear science comes very close to Vedanta. And several scientists today are showing the parallels between Vedanta or the Eastern philosophies, that's the language they use, Eastern mystical experiences, the language they use, and modern scientific truths. That's why a new word has been coined to deal with Vedanta. Here, in this center, we had Aldous Huxley, and he wrote this book, Perennial Philosophy, a beautiful expression, the exact translation of the meaning we give to our religion in India, Sanatana Dharma, eternal religion, perennial philosophy. Now, Aldous Huxley wrote a book with this title, Perennial Philosophy. It created quite a great impression on the minds of people. And today, in many books on physical science and its correlation with Vedanta and spiritual ideas, this word perennial philosophy comes again and again. Just recently, a book has been published, very interesting name, The Holographic Paradigm and Other Essays by Ken Wilber. It's an American book, Ken Wilber, and in that book you will find this kind of study, real discussion by various thinkers, physicists, psychologists, biologists, all are there dealing with the subject. And this wonderful truth comes there. If modern physical science and its truths are to be put in a proper philosophical framework, that framework is what is given by perennial philosophy. That's the language used there. Essentially a Vedantic development, but you find it also in mystical experiences in all parts of the world, and particularly the Eastern world, Chinese Taoist philosophy, Buddhistic philosophy, Hindu Vedanta philosophy. These philosophical ideas alone can become a background or a groundwork for conclusions of modern science. So in that book, Ken Wilber develops this subject and shows how advanced these Vedantic truths are, that they welcome these new scientific developments, and they also provide the necessary philosophical background for modern scientific thought. That is the lofty dimension of Vedanta, which can stand the challenge of modern science, which can be a friend of modern science, which can help modern science to understand itself better. Now, this kind of presentation makes Vedanta so relevant from the intellectual point of view. But that is not the only thing. Much more important point of view is the challenge of the modern age to man. Man has become almost a machine in this machine age. We are living in the machine age, and many great thinkers are protesting against the mechanization of man that has taken place in this modern age. Even an agnostic like Bertrand Russell says man has become so mechanized that he has persuaded himself to believe that he is nothing but a machine. He has no soul. He is not a subject but an object. Now, this attitude creates all sorts of psychic tensions. And all psychiatry today, psychoanalysis today, are trying to cure man from these tensions arising from this very fact. Man has forgotten his nature as a subject and not an object. Don't treat yourself as an object. You are a subject. If you do so, if you treat yourself as objects, then one experience will come to you, which is a universal experience in modern civilization. And they all call it by one word, alienation. Man gets alienated first from himself, then from the world outside. So alienation is a standing disease of the human mind today. So much of science, so much of intellectual development, so much of power over the forces of nature, and yet man is alienated, he is unhappy, he is tense, frustrated, bored. What has happened to man? It is here that this great contribution comes from Vedanta. Man is a subject, not an object. He is the self. When he understands it within himself, he can deal with others also from the same point of view. When I am a mere object or a machine, I will deal with other human beings also as objects and machines. That's what is happening more and more. And so Bertrand Russell says in that passage, that is in his book, Post-War Speeches, Impact of Science on Society, that very soon a time will come when everybody will go to a factory. After all, we are all workers, big or small work we do in every factory. You deal with a computer. It's a big work today. And you go before a computer or any other factory, and just Bertrand Russell words, you take flowers in your hands, place them before the machine and say, make me a good nut and bolt in you. That's the language they will use. Because I have become a machine. Now out of this comes alienation, unfulfillment, all sorts of psychic tensions. I was reading a book by this famous writer, Erich Fromm, American scientist. He has written a book, Escape from Freedom. Many books he has written. This is very interesting. A comparative study of Freud and Karl Marx. Very beautiful study. Lot of Vedanta comes in when he writes there. What is wrong with man? What did Freud do? Freud's greatest work, he says, to help people to destroy the illusions in which they live. We are all living in an illusion. We must come to reality. That kind of confrontation with reality is needed. That's why psychoanalysis helps a person overcome illusion, the illusory world it has built up, and see the real world and relate yourself to it. Marx also had the same view, an illusory world of relations between man and man. Destroy it, create the real world. In this way, he brings harmony between these two thinkers in this modern period. But he says, both the thinkers insisted on one thing, that man's alienation from himself and other human beings is the central problem of modern man. There, the remedy remains, man must discover himself. He must throw away all illusions about himself. And Freud understood religion as an illusion, as taught in the Western world at the time. Dogmas and creeds, institutional forms, which have taken humanity to mutual destruction, persecution of scientists, all this we have seen, including the evils that existed in the 19th century industrial society of exploiting even child labor in the interest of this, and religion sponsoring all these things. So one of his books is called The Future of an Illusion. He is dealing with religion. It has no place at all. One important point that Freud brings out, according to Erich Fromm, is primitive man had no sense of alienation. He was fully in touch with nature outside and with other human beings. But as you become civilized, you become more alienated. And more civilization, more alienation. The beautiful equation he has given there. The more civilization, the more alienation. That is the conclusion given by Freud in that book. Because we cut away from nature, cut away from other human beings, highly individualistic we become. So alienation is bound to come. Then psychic tension and the psychiatric troubles. Then go into analysis for correcting all this. So that is one aspect of it. Similarly also in social life, we become alienated from that society without which we cannot live at all. Man cannot become human without that human social context that we forsake in industrial civilization. So we suffer from alienation. Now in this case, the subject comes, emphasis is, there is a profound dimension in man himself. He is a subject, not an object. He must realize this truth. Now when you put it in that form, you are only repeating the great truth of Vedanta. Man as the infinite Atman, ever free, ever pure, not a item among items. That uniqueness is there, that spiritual nature of man, of the nature of pure consciousness, ever free. That's what Vedanta says again and again. It is out of this we banish alienation. We can deal with ourselves better, and we can deal with others better when we understand this truth about our own true nature. Vivekananda brought this message of the supreme divinity of every soul to this Western world. That is the great central teaching of Vedanta. Man is essentially divine. When he addressed the Parliament of Religions in 1893, he emphasized this point. You are children of immortality, not children of sin, not children of delusion. You are children of immortality. With what telling effect he presented this truth of Vedanta. Srinvandu Vishwe Amritasya Putraha. Hear me, O ye children of immortality. I have a profound message to convey to you. You are not this tiny body-mind complex. There is something infinite about you. Realize this truth, then you will achieve fulfillment. This was a great message Vedanta brought to deal with the central problem of man-industrial civilization, namely alienation. This is why Vedanta's relevance is much more now than what it was in ancient times. Things were not as bad. I may be poor, but I am not alienated. Even the poorest man was not alienated. Today the poor or rich are the same. Alienation is there all the while in our life, and that makes for all these distortions. And so Vedanta brought this profound message about man's true nature. Vivekananda puts it in those 4 propositions, the whole Vedanta, as a message to modern man. Each soul is potentially divine. First truth. This is a truth which was discovered by sages. You can also rediscover them for yourself and make your life fulfilled, says Vedanta. Each soul is potentially divine. The goal of life is to manifest this divine within, to unfold it by controlling nature, external and internal. Not only external nature, science controls external nature, but there must be another science to control internal nature. Then do this and be free. That is the third proposition. Do this and be free. Doctrines and dogmas, rituals and books and temples and churches are only secondary details, not the primary one. Main thing is, are you free? Are you free? Are you fulfilled? Are you fulfilled? Is there a science and technique which can help me to become fulfilled, to become free? Are we free and fulfilled in this industrial civilization based entirely on physical science? The answer is no. Every writer will say, we are not seeing people fulfilled. If they were fulfilled, if they were free, you would not see this increase of crime and delinquency and all sorts of psychic distortions in society. Some new message must come. That message is what Vedanta brought, man's own infinite nature. Vivekananda uses wonderful language to express it. He goes into ecstasy. Never forget that luminous nature of man. We are all that infinite one. We don't know this truth. That is the infinite possibility hidden in every human being. Let there be a science and technique by which these possibilities can be unfolded. High character, greater sense of belonging, capacity to dig affections in each other. All these will come as we unfold this divinity more and more. Romarola, in his Life of Vivekananda, therefore said, the central theme of all the speeches of Vivekananda, first in the parliament of religions, later outside, was this: man's innate divinity and his infinite possibility for development. That is the truth the world needs today, corresponding to nature's possibilities, physical nature's possibilities discovered by nuclear science. We need human possibilities to be also accepted by humanity today. That is where Vedanta comes in, and it has no conflict with the infinite possibilities discovered in physical nature by nuclear science. These are complementary, not at all in conflict. Vedanta sees harmony, where many Western philosophies and religions found only conflict, conflict, conflict all the time. In Swami Vivekananda's presentation of Vedanta, you will find that wonderful harmony between physical science and the science of spirituality. They must go together. This is the practical application of Vedanta, which is much more serious. Theoretically, we can ignore many of these parallels between perennial philosophy and modern science. But this day-to-day program of human life and human struggle for fulfillment, if that is arrested, the whole psyche becomes distorted. And we are passing through that phase in modern industrial civilization. So that the modern man and Vedanta is a profound correlation. If modern man is to become fulfilled, he needs to take recourse to the truths contained in this great philosophy. I said earlier, they are truths, not opinions, not dogmas, not creeds. As truths, they are eternal. As truths, you can discover them. As dogmas, you cannot discover them. You cannot question them. You have just to believe them. Vedanta comes and says, no, here are truths. They have been discovered by great scientists in the field of religion, in the field of spirituality. They were also scientific minds in search of this truth. One of the greatest of such was Buddha, whose birthday comes on the 15th, this full moon night, 2,600 years ago. He discovered this profound truth of man's purity, man's freedom, man's infinite dimension. This is a great truth Upanishads discovered first. It was rediscovered, rechecked by a succession of great sages, and today it becomes a science for re-verification by every human being. That is much more important than building a good house, putting all the gadgets in it, which technology helps us to achieve today. That is why modern man is seeking for some such life-giving principle. At that time, Swamiji brought Vedanta. Since then, it is winning hearts, winning minds. Both are there. Winning the intellect of man, his reason and his heart, both are being taken into consideration by Vedanta, so that a whole development of man becomes possible. You may stifle the intellect, satisfy your emotion, or stifle the emotion, satisfy the intellect. Neither of these can do good to humanity. If you can help both, that's wonderful. There you can see the great theme of Vedanta, intellectually strengthening, emotionally purifying and strengthening. And Vivekananda presented Vedanta from that point of view. That is how a total human development becomes possible, individual and collective. Modern 20th century biology has used one word to describe the goal of evolution at the human phase. In the 19th century, the goal of evolution at the human and subhuman levels was one and the same, namely organic satisfaction, physical survival, and numerical increase. But 20th century biology says this is only a secondary consideration. Something else has become primary, at the human stage. And that he calls, biology calls, fulfillment. Biology asks man, are you fulfilled? Evolution asks man, are you fulfilled? That's a wonderful new idea, fulfillment. In all Vedanta, this word comes again and again. In Sanskrit we call it kritakrityata, kritarthata, having done what ought to be done. Having been as a human being, born here, have you achieved that highest? That's what's called fulfillment. Buddha used this very word. When he realized the truth, he said, I have done what ought to be done, being born as a human being. I have that tremendous possibility within me to realize my own infinite nature, my freedom and my purity. Now, man has physical possibilities, intellectual possibilities, they are all proper. They don't exhaust his fullest possibility. That possibility comes in that realization of his own infinite dimension. Vedanta emphasizes this in many passages. One is famous in the Chandogya Upanishad, the teacher telling the student, you are that, you are that. Tattvamasi, Tattvamasi. A profound statement in Vedanta, a great truth compressed in these three words. Tat, Tvam, Asi. That thou art. Thou art not this tiny organic system. Thou art that infinite one, that divine spark. That is your true nature. This is a truth discovered by sages and placed before others for rediscovery, rechecking with a view to getting fulfillment in their own life. And they will add, there is no other way. There is no other way. More physical science, more technology, more sensory satisfactions, that is not the way. You will go deeper and deeper into trouble. More and more unfulfillment will come to you. Take to this study. Understand your own true nature. Go beyond the physical limitations, organic limitations. Realize the infinite one that is within you. That is the way man can achieve total fulfillment. So in many areas you will find common words, common terminologies, common concepts coming between Vedanta and modern science. Above all, as I said, the great urge in the heart of man. How to get rid of this division in my system, this psychic system, this alienation that has come upon me. How to make myself healthy in the true sense of the term. How I can smile and face my problems with a smile. How can I deal with others? By entering into their hearts, allowing them to enter into my heart as well. This digging affections in each other. Now these are the problems that affect us, that afflict us in a big way in the modern period. And precisely it is here Vedanta has something fundamental, something unique to contribute to all humanity, and that contribution is rational and universal and practical. The more you question, the more you get out of it. This is not a modern statement. All books of Vedanta says, question if you want to get truth. If you question, you get the best of truth. If you swallow what is said, you get only mere opinion, mere dogma. They give the example of gold. The more you burn gold, the more it shines, the more it becomes pure. Similarly also truth. You must put it through the fire of inquiry, investigation, questioning. In many Vedanta books, this idea is expressed again and again. Only because you have got truth with you, you can say like this, yes, question, question. If there is no truth, only opinion or dogma, no philosophy can say, you must question, because questioning will destroy it. Vedanta wants people to understand this truth by questioning, by investigation, by putting it into practice in their life and discover this for themselves, that divine nature of man. It is a truth. Let every child realize this truth. All these problems of crime and delinquency and this big problem of alienation will completely go away from society when more and more people realize the divine spark that is hidden in every human being. The Atman, the word used in Vedanta, the infinite self. I am the self. I am not an object. I am not a thing among things. There's a unique datum within me that I must realize. I am a child of God. I am a spark of the divine. These are the words this wonderful system uses to deal with people at various levels of understanding, restoring a person to his own true selfhood is the best health that can come to that person. A child becomes alienated. We have many examples of children getting alienated. One such study is contained in a book published here, Dibs in Search of Self, by Virginia Axley. Beautiful book. Dibs is a fake name of a little child of 5 years old. That child didn't get enough love from parents who were busy after their own career, high scientific career. So this child withdrew into himself in a quiet corner of the room, lost all interest in life, and his intelligence also became covered over by this sense of alienation. That is the nature of Dibs. How he was returned to health is the nature of that book. A wonderful method. They call it play therapy. No psychoanalysis, no psychiatry, nothing. Only play therapy. Just play. And the child expresses everything in the course of play. In that book it is written there that this child, Dibs, who had lost his sense of his own self, that self was restored to him by play therapy. The language is the same. Atmajnana was given to this little child, Dibs. Atmajnana means knowledge of the self, what Vedanta handles. But mostly we handled it at the high level of a sage or a philosopher, but not a disturbed, emotionally disturbed child. But Swami Vivekananda extended the application of Vedanta to all aspects of human life. That jnana of the Upanishad applied to Dibs in that particular situation is restoring to him the confidence in himself to face life. That is the level of Atmajnana that child can understand. That is also Atmajnana. So in that book, this very word is used, that after the play therapy, Dibs could identify himself with a notion of his own self, which was sufficiently respectable, sufficiently encouraging, and he became normal. That's language used there. So this is how destroy an illusion. The reality must come to you. Then you are yourself. So this aspect is to be applied to everybody. We are all in varying levels of clutching at illusion and getting away from reality. Vedanta brings that message to everyone at his or her own level of understanding and life. To the great sages, it will speak one language. To average persons, it will speak a different language. But truth is the same, so that it can be lifted step by step to that high level. That is why Swami Vivekananda's presentation of Vedanta, particularly he stressed that word practical. Practical Vedanta. Vedanta is a theory, is beautiful. Just like scientific theories, they are beautiful. But this is not mere theory. It is a life principle. It can brighten life. One little truth of Vedanta can brighten a man's life. That is the message. Among all the truths, this central truth, the divinity hidden in every human being. The sages discovered this truth and asked people to rediscover it for themselves. All over the world, when I go, I find the wonderful response of fresh minds. You have never heard of this subject before, but when it is presented, that there is a divine spark in you, they immediately get ignited. They feel this is wonderful. I had that response when I addressed a meeting in Berlin, West Berlin. A young man came forward, a German youth, after the lecture. Swamiji, you said about the divine spark in every human being. I have never heard of it before, but it is wonderful. I would like to know more about it. I speak in Moscow State University among communist intellectuals in that university. There I presented this subject, Vivekananda's humanism. What is unique in Vivekananda's humanism? We have plenty of humanism in the West. The Greeks had it, Romans had it, and then the Christian religion brought it. Then we had modern scientific humanism since the Renaissance, and now we have Marxist humanism also. Various types of humanism we have, but all of them lack something which Vedanta is there to supply. Swamiji brought that idea. That is this divine spark behind this human being. That must be unfolded. There's a big possibility hidden. So when I spoke in Moscow University on this subject, Vivekananda's humanism, based on the divine in the heart of man, and his effort to unfold it by changing nature outside and within the man himself. At the end of the lecture, when questions came, this was the main question. One professor asking, that's a wonderful idea, that man has a divine spark within. I would like to know more about it. So here is the wonderful contribution of Vedanta to compose the distractions of the human psyche in this highly technical, scientific civilization of ours. Everything is rich around us, rich, well developed outside. Inwardly, everything is poor, everything is broken. Why should man be so? The biggest tragedy of man is to be rich externally and to be poor inwardly and remain absolutely crestfallen, full of frustration, and one day commit suicide even. Is it for this the world has developed all this knowledge? So many writers have referred to this predicament. In that predicament context only, we can understand the greatness, the beauty, the profundity of the Vedanta that Swamiji brought to the modern world. He preached it both in India and the Western world. There is a small writing by Oscar Wilde, that famous English literary genius. He had wonderful life, sometimes crime, all that is there, Oscar Wilde's story. But he is a great writer. He has written a small piece. It is very interesting from the modern point of view. I think the title is The Doer of Good, is the title. The story is just simply Jesus comes from heaven to visit his children in this 19th and 20th century. That is the story. Let me see how my children are faring now. So Jesus comes into this world. He just goes to one of these industrial cities, wanders about there, and he finds a man absolutely drunken, soaking himself in drink and sitting there. Jesus goes up to him. Hello, John, don't you know me? I am Jesus. Hello, yes, I know. I know you, he said. That's good. Then he asked him, why are you drinking and soaking your soul in this drink all the time? You have nothing else to do? Oh Lord, he said, I was lame and you gave me life, gave me strength, gave me good limbs, and what else shall I do? Just like this I shall drink and go on. I don't know any other purpose in life. Jesus was very sorry, felt so much sorrow for him, and walked on. After some distance, he found a man running after a harlot, just running in the town. Wait, Jesus asked him, what's the matter? Don't you know me? I'm Jesus. Yes, you are Jesus. Very good. Now why do you do like this? Wasting your life like this, ruining it? Lord, I had no eyes, I was blind. And you gave me eyes. What else shall I do except run after this? Then after some time, he was so upset, full of sadness in his heart, still further. Then he found a man just going to fall down from a tall building, committing suicide. Looked up, Jesus. Well, John, what are you doing? Oh, you are Jesus, I'm glad to see you. Now what are you doing like this? Lord, I was dead. You brought me back to life. What else shall I do? Die again, he said. And Jesus felt sad. What a happy thing. What has come to humanity today? Now that is a small write-up. This kind of thing you can see in many books today, that something is missing. Everything is there, but one vital element is missing. Put that, everything becomes right. It is that missing vital element that Vivekananda brought in the name of Vedanta to this modern world. That missing element, that word is very important. Shankaracharya tells a story. With that story I shall conclude this lecture. 10 people went to the city, did some business and proceeded towards their village. On the way they had to cross a river. They swam across. After going there, they felt one of them was drowned. And they counted. They found only 9. So one of them drowned, so they started weeping. A man was passing by. Cursorily he looked and found there are really 10. But they know it's only 9. So what to do with these people? We have counted, we are only 9, they said. So he said, you stand by, all of you. Now count one by one. You count. 1. Then the last man counted 10. But you are the 10. Oh, we didn't count ourselves. We counted all others, we did not count ourselves. This new man said to everyone, you are that missing 10th. You are that missing 10th. You are that missing 10th. That missing 10th story, Shankaracharya tells, there you can see man as the Atman, as the self, as the subject, not an object. You treat everything as object only, that won't do. You are the eternal subject. Then no alienation can come. Here is a spiritual message which the world needs today. Vedanta brings that spiritual message. And Swamiji's warning is there in the lecture delivered in America and one delivered in India. The whole of Western civilization is sitting on a volcano. It may burst today or tomorrow. Unless you make spirituality the basis of this civilization has no future at all. He said it in the 1890s. Then came 2 huge world wars. Big explosions they were, but much more serious is the social explosion that is going on today. All sorts of unfulfillments, psychic distortions, social distortions, and eventually the terrible nuclear war that may come to us in the future if we do not become wise. So Swamiji said, this civilization can become beautiful, making for total human fulfillment if this little change is done. Put spirituality at the basis of this civilization. That is precisely the work of Vedanta. Through that Vedanta, every religion which had lost itself in creeds and dogmas will rediscover its own spiritual dimension, so that these religions will become positive forces to enrich man today. That's how Vedanta will act on these religions also, to become sources for spiritual nourishment of modern man, which is very much needed. This is the great work that Vedanta has started doing for modern man. Vedanta and modern man. There is absolute correlation between the two. One needs the other. Vedanta becomes alive when it solves the problems of modern man. Modern man becomes fulfilled when it takes the help of Vedanta to achieve this very purpose. The subject is so relevant today. I am glad to speak on this subject before you. Vedanta and modern man. Thank you.
And Swami is used to questions. We won't have too many questions, but a few questions probably we can entertain. If anybody, yes?
Thank you very much for talking to it very much. In keeping with the idea of our divine nature, there is part of me that wants to very much separate our divine essence, whatever it is, and our life as human beings here on earth. And this is just some recent thinking that I'm going through, is that I tend to want to think that our divine nature is in many ways not totally directly connected with what we do here on this earth. Part of me, in other words, seems to think that all of
the question. Put the question.
Pardon?
Put the question.
Okay. I guess in a way what I want to think is you mentioned that part of the thing is to prevent our destroying ourselves on Earth. Would that really be a tragedy, destroying life? Because our divine nature is going to go on anyway. And I'm just wondering if destroying life as we know it is really a tragedy.
About 800 people went to South America and committed suicide some 5 years ago. You remember, all the newspapers published, you know. So that is a desperate attempt to solve problem. How to solve life's problem? End life. There is no wisdom at all. There is no problem when life is gone. Problem is only when life is there. So taking away life doesn't make solution of the problem. What Vedanta says is, here is this body-mind complex. Some profound truth is hiding within it. Try to understand it. Then life becomes fulfilled. That positive challenge Vedanta wants people to ask and then find the answer. Everybody can do it. This is the nature of every human being. Only it was not directed that way. That's all. So meaninglessness comes. Even Freud has referred to the death wish in the individual, in his psychology. Every individual has a death wish. And this collective death also can take place as a result of that death wish of the subconscious or the unconscious. But the Atman is eternally there. That Atman must act upon this life that we live at the conscious level. Then this becomes brightened. This becomes fulfilled. There's a positive approach, the other is a negative approach.
Any other?
Swamiji, what did you say the title of Ken Wilber's book was?
The Holographic Paradigm and Other Essays. Hologram is a wonderful new word. He studies there and give definition also. Here is in Stanford University, Carl Pribram, who is a neurologist. David Baum, physicist in England. They collaborated together. And the brain is a hologram. The world is a hologram. This hologram studies that hologram. The uniqueness of hologram is part is in the whole. You take a photo, holographic photo, and then cut a portion of it, develop it, that portion becomes the whole photo. There is no part, what you call fraction in a hologram. So these are all Vedantic ideas putting into this language today. The whole, for example, study the Gita, one single sentence there. The Atman is the undivided reality existing as if divided in separate things in this world. That's how the Atman is divided. It is explained there. Avibhaktam cha bhuteshu, vibhaktam iva cha sthitam. There you can see, in spiritual reality, there is no such thing as division. Atman is fully in me, fully in you, fully in everybody. That's the nature of the Atman. Now this hologram idea comes close to it from physical point of view. So that book is the title, The Holographic Paradigm and Other Essays by Ken Wilber.
Yes.
Swami, by making a man the objective person, won't he achieve the same thing as he would by being subjective, minus all the things connected with the subjective person?
Man is doing already, treating himself as an object. Therefore he is in trouble, because he is not the object. He is essentially the subject. He is secondarily an object.
Yes.
Subjective man will have more harm.
Suppose I deal with the chair, it is an object. And I deal with a human being as a chair, and I sit on him. That's what we do in exploitation. When you exploit a human being, you treat him as an object. So, you sit on a chair, you don't put the chair on your head. Similarly, we sit on a man, because he is an object to me. Human relations become vitiated by that attitude. I must recognize myself as a subject, extend that awareness, my dealing with other human beings as well. They are all subjects. Then only you have a happy society, fulfilled society. That's the idea.
Want to ask? Yeah.
Swami, the alienation you talked about, does that give rise to feelings of guilt? Or where does guilt come from?
The one thing that Vedanta brings to this modern world is there is no guilt feeling. Eliminate this guilt feeling. It has come to us from a theology which has implanted it in us. It has to be removed. There is no guilt feeling.
How do you remove?
We do harm, we do evil, we do sin. But there is no guilt feeling means I have done wrong, I shall do better. That pathological condition of guilt feeling should not be there. Sin is a fact. Guilt is a fact. Suppose I do something wrong, there is a guilt. But guilt feeling, when we say there is what you call something pathological about it, that has to go. That has come from theology. Until the guilt feeling is removed from the human psyche, no moral life is possible.
Is it only Western civilization that's undergoing this abuse?
Semitic thinking,
Oh.
particularly Semitic thinking. And Christian teaching, there is that original guilt, and we are all part of it. This is something terrible. Somebody did something, I am to pay for the guilt for it. But it has been indoctrinated into it, so we have to get rid of it. That's all. And that original sin. The biggest sin is to call a man a sinner, Vivekananda said. Here there was a
All right.
Mr. Chandler connected with this center. He was a film writer, David Chandler, Swami Prabhumananda's devotee and friend. He came to Delhi for some work connected with filmmaking. He used to come to my lectures in the ashrama there. Every time he will come and discuss with me for hours together. That I cannot understand. This I cannot understand Vedanta, like that he will say. One day he came up in beaming face. Now I understand everything. When I knocked away that concept of original sin, everything became clear in Vedanta. This is what in language he wrote. And that article also is published here in Vedanta and the West, Old Issues. David Chandler's 3 articles of this subject.
Swamiji, they say I have no ego, but if the divine spark is in me, then I have the ego.
Ego.
I mean, if they say that I am nobody, I am a part of him, but if he is in me, then I am somebody. I don't like.
I could make out the point of it.
Who says that you don't have ego?
No, doesn't it say have no ahem?
Oh, religious teaching is don't have ego. Whereas the spiritual divine spark is there, that means I have the ego.
The word ego and the self are 2 different things. Ego is the self controlled and conditioned by the body-mind complex, presiding over this tiny, what you call genetic system. That is the ego. Western Freudian psychology also, ego is a place there. But the self is not that is contained only in this body-mind complex. It is infinite. It is expansive. So when you develop the self, your ego is called the expanded ego. If you want to keep the word ego, there is no harm. Ramakrishna also, you kept the word ego. The unripe ego and the ripe ego, Ramakrishna said. The unripe ego is what is conditioned by the genetic system. The ripe ego expands beyond the limitations of the genetic system so that you can love other people. A mere ego cannot love others. It is self-centered. It is an individual. But the ripe ego goes beyond such limitation. There you see the Atman manifesting through the ego, changing the character of the ego.
All right.
Swami, Einstein's theory of relativity is said to be embodied into the broad Vedanta concepts. But would you please enlighten just in nutshell only how this space idea, everything is embodied?
In a nutshell, if you are to say, the whole concept of relativity in modern physics is what Vedanta calls Maya. The whole world is Maya, means it is all what you call indeterminate, one depending upon the other. That's the nature of relativity. There's nothing absolute. This world is Maya. That's one truth. But that's not the highest truth. That within this Maya, there is an absolute, infinite, the pure self. That is the second truth that Vedanta adds. So relativity, what lies beyond it is the absolute. And Einstein also said, the search of science is for the absolute. But when it gets something, it finds it is relative. Then again continues to search for what is absolute. Searches for the absolute. That is what you experience in spiritual life, not intellectual search, but in spiritual life. I am that absolute. Beyond this body-mind complex, beyond causality, beyond time, beyond space, that is my true nature. So in Vedanta, this is the teaching the teacher gives to the student. Tattvamasi, Tattvamasi. You are that which is beyond these limitations of time, space, causality. Jati niti kula gotra duragam nama rupa gunadosha varjitam. Teacher tells the student, you are beyond the limitations of time, space, causality, name and form. You are that infinite Atman. Realize this truth for yourself. So this is an experience. Intellectually, you get only relativity. Logically, you get only relativity. The absolute cannot be got through logic. Only experience can come. So, Einstein's relativity is a step towards proceeding beyond relativity. If physical science cannot give it, search another science which will give it. That is spirituality. Spirituality installs you in the realization of that infinite, unconditioned reality. That is God.